I often hear from people who have a full first draft of their memoir manuscript and no idea what to do next. And unfortunately, when you are in this position, it can be very, very difficult to know what to do next that doesn't involve spending thousands of dollars on a manuscript review or a developmental edit. But the good news is there are different pieces of advice that I give depending on the state of the manuscript. And today I want to give you the key way to tell which type of draft you have and, as a consequence, what type of editing you need. Stay tuned.
You've got the story, you've got the idea, you just don't know the steps in the process. If this is what's holding your memoir back, I have got the solution for you. The Memoir Method Checklist is going to take you through every single step you need from idea to published, marketable book. And you can download it now at pageandpodium.com/checklist.
If you have a full draft or even a partial draft, even a mostly completed draft of your memoir, you might be thinking about approaching an editor. And part of the reason that we wanted to start this 4-part series on revising is that one thing an editor cannot do for you is revise. So before we kind of dive into this, I want to give you some quick definitions on revising and editing in case that was a surprising thing for you to hear. But then the bulk of this video, I'm going to talk through how we think about the 5 types of drafts. Because what you'll find is that if you can accurately identify which type of draft you have, you will have a much, much clearer roadmap for what the next step is. And spoiler alert, the next step is probably not hiring an editor. Okay, so with that said, let's dive into the definitions between revising and what I often hear people confuse with revising, which is editing. Okay, so to start, when you are finishing your draft, I can guarantee that the first thing you need to do is not edit, and certainly it is not hire someone to edit. The first thing you need to do is revise. So what is the difference here? When we talk about revision in terms of moving from your first draft into your second, sometimes second into third, and so on, depending on your project and process, what we are talking about is large scale moving things around, making sure the structure works, refining the ideas, clarifying the message, these kind of 10,000 foot view things that tend to get lost when we are in the weeds of writing. Now, if you are someone who decided to write your memoir and you didn't put an outline together, or maybe your outline wasn't quite as kind of solid or helpful as you thought it might be, this is going to go double. One thing that you will find is if you are able to outline, to very, very clearly set out a detailed plan for your book before you start writing, oftentimes your structure can be kind of built in and in place before you start. And this is, by the way, the philosophy that really underlies the whole Memoir Method group program that we host over at Page and Podium. But I think it's also just worth noting that if this isn't something that you had access to, or it isn't something that you knew about or chose to take advantage of, you probably are at a stage where you have a draft that's going to need quite a bit of moving around, right? You will now need to take that draft and kind of figure out what order the different pieces go in, how to most effectively tell the story. Sometimes that you will have come up with a message as you wrote, but that message isn't necessarily consistent throughout the piece, and you might have even shifted on your topic a little bit. That is okay. But I also think when we talk about it that way, it makes it very, very clear that when we have a draft that doesn't have kind of built-in structure, it doesn't have, a built-in cohesive message, we do have a lot of work to do. And I bet you knew that. I don't think I'm telling you anything that you didn't know. But the reason that I like to use the term revising rather than editing is that I often find that revising does resonate a little bit more as kind of a larger scale workshopping of an existing draft. Whereas editing is very often the thing that we actually would really prefer to do. It's often a lot easier and it's a lot more attractive. When I talk about editing, what I mean is that you're sitting with your work at the line level. So what I mean by that is that when you go back through your draft, what you're doing when you edit is you're looking for spaces where the prose is maybe not as clear as it could be. Maybe you got a little bit wordy, maybe you have some run-on sentences, or maybe you feel like, the style kind of changes from the beginning to the end. That is very, very common in your first draft, by the way. Be kind to yourself. But as we edit, we are in there at the kind of word and sentence level. When we're revising, as I mentioned earlier, we are not at the line and sentence level. Necessarily, we are at the 10,000-foot view. We are looking for structure, cohesiveness of message, solidness of our topic. When we're editing, we're looking for the beauty of our prose, the clarity of our communication in that particular moment. So these are really different tasks, and they're really different mindsets. And the reason I really wanted to separate them, and you will hear me do this, by the way, throughout this revision series, the reason I really wanted to do this is because it is so important that you are honest with yourself about whether you are revising or editing. The reason is, if you are editing when you should be revising, you are 100% wasting your time and energy and effort. And I don't want you to do that. So, if you are somebody who has been going through your draft with a red pen and making line level changes, stop. Today, I'm going to get you started back on the right path because we're going to move you out of editing and into revising, where 90% of the time is where you need to be. Okay, so with that said, I promised you our 5 types of drafts and a way forward for each. And I want to make sure that we get into that so I have time to kind of talk through each of these individually. And before we get there, I do want to put a quick plug. I promise it's going to be quick. Hang with me. And just let you know that we have been working on some changes to our group program, to the memoir method. And one of those changes is that we are building in more intentional, structured support for our members who come to us with a draft, either full or partial, already completed. Now, this is something that is a little bit different than, of course, if you were starting from just an idea, which is really where we have focused in the past. But many of the things that you would be doing if you had joined the memoir method from the beginning are actually quite similar to the processes that you need to do when you revise. So this was a change that we decided to make because I hear from so many people who find this channel and find our program, but they've already gotten started. And you know what? I totally get that you don't want to just start over. So we wanted to make sure that there was some built-in structured support for you, even if you've done quite a lot of work already. So I am excited to welcome you to the program. If you are someone that is in that boat, you can head over to pageandpodium.com/contact to fill out a form to have a chat with me, make sure that you're going to be a really good fit for the program. So head over there after you finish this video. All right, without further ado, thanks for hanging with me. I want to talk about the first type of draft. Now, shout out to my right hand in the program, Emily Thrash, who put together this just charming way of thinking about these types of drafts as an extended metaphor about types of houses. Now, the first type of draft that you might have is the chaos house. Now, this type of house, this type of draft, actually often doesn't even really look like a house when we give it scrutiny. So if you think about if you have ever either had a house built for yourself, if you've maybe had some friends that had houses built from scratch, if you've been through kind of development areas, you will probably have seen a chaos house. And all a chaos house is that we have all of the materials, everything has been gathered together. Sometimes there even is a foundation. If the house is going to have a basement, there might be a big hole in the ground. But we basically have the pieces of a house without the things that really make it a house, right? We do not have standing walls. We do not have any kind of structure of doors or windows or even the way that the rooms will be separated. But isn't so much of the battle having all of the materials ready? Yes, it is, by the way. I have not built my own house, but as someone who has done a fair number of remodels on old houses, picking all the stuff is really, really important. And if you have a chaos house draft, I really want you to hear me say that. Maybe you have spent years journaling, pulling together your ideas. Maybe you have gone even through that journal and kind of chosen the moments that you want. That is so valuable. That has helped you learn so much about the story you want to tell. Maybe you decided to sit down at the computer and kind of write and see what type of form might come out, kind of see where you end up. That can be an exciting and exhilarating process, and it can be quite frustrating. So kudos to you for getting through that. But as you did that, we weren't really putting into place structure, right? What we were doing was pulling in the different elements and components that we are going to need for that book. That is very valuable work you've done. But it doesn't have the structure that we need to really hold the story up and make it enjoyable to read. And this can take other forms too, by the way, besides kind of a long draft that you pantsed, means flying by the seat of your pants as opposed to having a structure plan to begin with. It can look different than that in journaling. It might look also as though, if you have written a kind of a series of letters, if you have written blog posts, we see this very, very often. If you're somebody that has blogged for a long time, you do have these materials that are on your blog, and those are so, so valuable. But the thing that I really want you to hear me say is that even though you do have all those components, you have a lot of work to build them into a house, right? We did this kind of difficult part of really excavating all of the things that we need to have for that book, but we really don't have a book at this stage. So if you feel like that might be you, if you feel like you have a full draft and you know that you didn't pay as much attention to structure as you wish you would have, maybe even any attention to structure, you are probably working with a chaos house. It sounds so much scarier than it really has to be, because actually the chaos house is a great thing to have. When you have this type of draft, all you're going to do is go back to the beginning. I know it hurts your heart, but go with me here. You're going to go back to the beginning and you are going to outline your book as though you hadn't written it yet. Now, I am not ever going to tell you then throw away the whole draft. Never. I don't think it's a good idea, and it just is really demoralizing. We're not doing that. We have loads of great material, and we're absolutely not going to throw out the baby with the bathwater. But we do need to be able to zoom out to that 10,000-foot view and really figure out what it is you're trying to do with this book. So if this is you, you're going to start by putting the outline together. There are, by the way, tons of resources on this channel, so check those out. And you're going to put your outline together and figure out your structure without looking at your draft. Put it away, lock it in your desk drawer. We're not even going to peek. Once you have an outline that you feel really certain can support your house, it's going to be a solid foundation. You have got really, really strong, clear support beams. You know where the rooms are divided and why and what that's going to look like. You have a solid outline. Now we can get back into the draft with so much more clarity and so much more intention, because now we just have a matching game. Now we can go chapter by chapter through our structured outline and pull out the pieces of our manuscript that match those chapters. It is a little bit of a pain, that is true, but you are very, very far from starting over. It's going to pay off so much that you have taken the time to get those words on the page. We just need to take a little break from them so that we can move forward in a little bit more intentional, structured way. Okay, the second type of house that you might have is the skeletal frame. Now, this type of draft is typically not a full-length draft. So you might have anything in the range of 12,000, 15,000, 25,000, 24,000, by the way, is a number I often find people get stuck at, all the way up to 40 or 45,000, even 60,000, if you know that most of what you have put in there is brainstormy type of stuff. So this is typically a partial draft. That is the easiest way to define the skeletal frame. But the important part is not that it's partial. The important part is how it's partial. Now, oftentimes when folks come to us with a skeletal frame type of draft, there is a lot of clarity in the area of either message or storyline. And usually what we see is that people have kind of put some of the pieces of structure in place. So, for instance, maybe you have kind of gotten started and you know that you want to start that book with a really exciting scene. Well, guess what? That is a structural thought. Now, just that thought alone, of course, is not enough for us to see the entire memoir and what it could be, but that might be something we think of as the foundation of a house, right? We can look at a foundation that's been laid and we know that that is going to be a house. You might even have some of the support structures in place, and that is also great. But the takeaway from this skeletal frame type of draft is that we really don't have the filled in components. So this is often someone, by the way, who is has a little bit more brevity in their kind of natural way of presenting themselves. You tend to write in a way that privileges things like very kind of tight, condensed sentences. And often you might be the type, I'm so jealous of you, who can write a really quick email, say what you need to say, and move forward. But one thing that comes with both the skeletal draft and the writer that often matches with the skeletal draft is that there's often a lot of doubt about whether you're going to be able to fill in the gaps. You know you don't have enough for a book, but oftentimes knowing that you don't have enough for a book on the page can start to feel like you don't have enough for a book in your story. And that is not true. So if this is you, if you have kind of worked at some of the major themes, you kind of have a sense of the general shape of the story, those are such important components. You have done such good work, but the way that we are going to move forward with this type of draft is very, very similar to what we did with the Chaos House, in that I want you to step back and I want you to outline as though you had nothing. Now again, just like with the Chaos House folks, you don't have nothing. You have some really, really valuable stuff here, but we are going to need to do a fair amount of structural work to make sure that that book, that house, is sound and safe and up to code / reader, publisher expectations. I don't know, probably taking this metaphor too far, but go along with me. So you are going to step back, you're going to check out some resources about how to outline, whether that is a structured program like the memoir method or some free resources or other types of things you find online, and you're going to get an entire outline drafted of your book. Now, unlike the Chaos House folks, where then we could just go through and kind of pull in and fill in the gaps where we needed them, with our skeletal frame, we know that we don't have enough, right? We're expecting that. So what is much more likely to happen with a skeletal frame is you may have kind of a bit here and there that you can pull, just as the Chaos House folks did, pull and plug into your outline. But the more important part of revising when you have this skeletal framework is making sure you have a plan. Now, y'all know I talk about this all the time, and it is so important to have a plan when you are drafting. But whether or not you had a formal plan as you set out to draft, you definitely need one if you are revising a skeletal framework draft. And what I mean by that is you're going to now need to go through your outline and make yourself a concrete plan for filling in those gaps. Otherwise, what we see 9 times out of 10, if folks do not do a plan for their skeletal framework draft, they will end up falling off. They will end up believing that little voice in their head that says, you don't have enough, there's not enough here. So make yourself a week by week plan of what exactly you need to be writing based on that outline that you created. Now, I know this feels a little bit like starting over, but again, I promise you're not. You have so many insights that you have developed through this process of putting that skeleton together. So trust, put that draft away in a desk drawer, sit with your outline, and then figure out what the plan is to get that fleshed out, because I can almost guarantee if you had enough to put a skeletal framework together, there is enough for a book. You can do it. Okay, the third type of house/draft is the lopsided house. Now, when a house is lopsided, Typically, that is a foundation issue. And I hope that you have never lived in a house where you had a major foundation issue. It can get quite expensive. And just as when houses have lopsided foundations, you have a lot of work to do when you end up with a lopsided house draft. So, what does this look like? Well, often this is something that is very specific to a particular type of memoir, and it's the type of memoir that we work with at Page and Podium, often called the hybrid memoir. And when we think about a hybrid memoir, usually people that are writing that are wanting to very carefully balance a story from their life with a particular bit of insight or wisdom or experience, or sometimes even formal education. So, for instance, if you are someone who is a lawyer and you want to write about a particular case that you went through that got really, really tough, and as you do that, you want to make sure that people are picking up on some pieces of advice that perhaps if your client had known, the case might have gone a lot better. So in that case, we know we need the story to move the message forward, and we need the message to make the story feel meaningful. That is great, and in fact, in my humble opinion, that is the strongest, most saleable type of memoir. So we want to do that. But what often happens when folks are trying to do that, and particularly if they don't have support along the way, we will end up with a pretty lopsided foundation. Now, what does that look like? In one case, we might end up with this lawyer's book that just ends up being maybe 75, even maybe 60% legal advice, but the story is just really not strong enough to hold it up. Now, I know you don't want that, because one of the things that people say to me all the time is they really hope that their book is not preachy. And I hope that too, because readers will not tolerate being preached at. You know that as a reader, I know that as an editor. We're all on the same page there. But what needs to happen then is that we need to make sure that we are shoring up the story piece while maintaining the integrity of the message piece, the teaching piece, right? On the other side of the coin, we may end up with a draft that the story is very, very strong, but we're not getting really the message or the teaching that you wanted to incorporate. I see this happen, by the way, very, very often for clients whose story involves the process of discovering that thing that they want to teach. And this is, by the way, really common, and it is a pretty simple fix if you know what you're doing. But what usually happens, if this is the case, is that folks will write their story kind of moving through maybe the first 3 quarters. And when they get to the point in the story, when they have made the discovery, when they have kind of, oh, okay, we have this epiphany that, all right, we know now the thing that we wish we knew, and we can move forward with this new piece of knowledge. At that point in the story, then we start to lose all semblance of narrative or storytelling structure, because there's so much information that you wanted to put in, but it didn't really feel like it made sense to put that stuff in earlier when you, as the narrator, had not yet discovered it. It can be really, really frustrating. So what that will often look like is a book that's kind of half and half, or like I said, 3 quarters and a quarter, where the first half, the first big section, is pretty much all story, and the second half, or second big section, is pretty much all teaching. This is not going to fly either, right? Because people who want to read a memoir want to read a memoir. People who want to read self-help want to read self-help. So when we are marketing as a memoir, we do really need to make super, super sure that we don't have lengthy sections of self-help that aren't held up by that story. So a lopsided foundation is almost always going to reveal itself by a mixture of story and message, but where those things are not incorporated well, where one is kind of stealing the show at any point in the draft, and there isn't a real sense of harmony. There isn't a sense that things go together well. So what do? Well, good news. If you are a lopsided house, I am actually not going to tell you to put your draft in a drawer. You can hold that draft dear and near to your heart. What you are going to do is reverse outline. Now, we have a whole video on this that I'll link in the show notes so you can find it, on how to revise. And as you are doing that reverse outline, really all you're doing is going through what you actually have, what you actually wrote, and you are making notes of what each major section of that draft, of that manuscript draft, is actually doing. In the other two types of drafts I've mentioned so far, it didn't really matter what the manuscript was doing because we knew we were going to need to do quite a bit of work, either filling in or organizing. But with this type of draft, it's really important that you can see the extent to which your draft is lopsided. And what I find is when you start going through that draft and making a note to yourself of what each, say, paragraph or two, each kind of major shift in what's happening in the book, if you start noting that, it will be so very clear to you that you have a lopsided foundation. So the good news is, once you have done that reverse outline, now you can look at it from that 10,000 foot view and you can make sure that the structure is what you want moving forward. And I know that what that is a combination of story and message in every single chapter. So if you've been watching long, you know I am a big proponent of a detailed outline. A detailed outline is simply 100 to maybe 150 words per chapter, just describing what's happening there. And if, as you are recreating that reverse outline and doing detailed descriptions of each chapter, if you start to realize that some chapters don't have any message, some chapters don't have any story, well, now you know exactly what you need to solve for. Now you know where your problem is, and you'll be so much better equipped to make sure that you are weaving these things together. Side note, this is really hard to do on your own, so I absolutely always want to support you through all of our content here on the blog, on the podcast, but one thing that I want to let you know is you really may need support to accomplish this in the way you want to. That's what we do best at Page and Podium, so I hope that you will reach out if this is where you are, and particularly if you're feeling frustrated. It is not necessary. I promise you can bring this together in the way that you are envisioning it in your mind. Okay, the fourth type of draft that you might have is the painted sandcastle. Now, unfortunately, this is a type of draft that I see all the time. And what a painted sandcastle is that we have a draft that doesn't have the structure in place that it needs. It may have a little more structure than a chaos house, not always though, but it doesn't have the kind of structure, the cohesion, or the sense of build, or the sense of kind of intentional message sharing that I know you want. Now, often what happens is that, just like I talked about earlier in this video, folks will finish their first draft outline and y'all know that you need to do revisions. But because our culture has so confused revising and editing, this very often and very understandably looks like editing when we really, really need some revision. So I will sometimes talk to folks who have put a draft together like this, and then they have spent a pretty considerable amount of time going through at the line level to polish the prose. So what happens is that while we assume that kind of putting this work in editing is going to bring us to the type of draft we want, at some point we realize that we aren't really making the progress that we want to make, right? We are effectively painting a sandcastle. Now, if this is you, I have a totally different piece of advice than any of the first three types of drafts, and that is let go. What I find so often is that when folks have a painted sandcastle, the reason that they are unable to move forward is not that they don't know what they're trying to accomplish. It's not that they don't have the willpower. And in fact, painted sandcastle folks are often very, very effective at having the willpower to do actual edits, just not revisions, but edits. And they are often really, really diligent about what they're trying to accomplish. And that is why, before you are going to be able to make anything like the progress that you want to make, you're going to have to let go. So if that's you, I want you to think about, is there another type of house that I have mentioned as I've gone through here that if you were to let go of the sense that you've done so much revision, it can't be a chaos house, right? If you were to let go of that, would you see your draft in one of those previous three? If so, my advice, Let go, grieve the work you did, mourn it. It is really hard to know that you have done a ton of work and a lot of it is not really what you should have been doing. That's really hard. Feel that feeling, feel that sadness, that loss, but then know you can do it. Once you've felt that sadness, that mourning, you can do it. You're just going to need to go back through and follow one of the other houses. Then, when you have done those revision steps, then we can move forward to that editing piece, to painting not a sandcastle, but to painting a really solid house. So if you're a painted sandcastle, oh man, I totally hear you. You are going to be able to do this. But be sure that you are really, really honest with yourself, because I promise it's going to hurt for a little bit and then it's going to feel so much better. Okay, the last type of draft that we see is the messy house. Very, very relatable, right? In a messy house, all of your walls are in place, the foundation is strong, and in fact, if you have a messy house type of draft, we also will have enough in the house that we know what that room is supposed to be. So for instance, we can tell when we walk into even the messiest of house if we're in the living room or the kitchen or the bedroom, right? Because all the pieces are there. But with a messy house, we aren't really able to see the full potential of that room because there's stuff all over, right? Now, in some ways, this is one of the harder types of revision because you probably need slightly different things at each section that needs to be revised. And that's why my advice here is to go ahead and either reverse outline if you haven't done that already. I suspect you may have. But if you have already done a reverse outline, I want you to revisit that, revise it, go back through your manuscript and really take stock of kind of what is the emotional tone and what is the goal. Are you hitting those two things? Is it going to be clear that we have a particular type of kind of emotional connection we're making with the reader, as well as that intellectual connection that you're looking to make if you're writing a hybrid memoir? That's going to give you a pretty clear roadmap for how to revise. You're really just going through kind of piece by piece by piece. Our previous video on revising is going to be really helpful here, so you can probably just flip over to that. And if you have a messy house, take some time to celebrate, because there is nothing more exciting than being so close on your draft that truly one or two, maybe three more passes through that manuscript is going to get you ready to send off to an editor. You are so close. Okay. If you are a messy house kind of person, I will tell you probably the memoir method is not going to be a good fit for you. Usually the folks that we're working with are at a little bit earlier stage. We would love to help you with the editing. Please feel free to reach out. But if you found yourself in any of the other 4 of those houses, let me tell you that we really have put a lot of thought and attention into how to make this program really work for any of those other types of drafts. I know it can feel like once you've finished drafting, you really shouldn't need support anymore. But let me tell you, you deserved support when you were writing, and you deserve support now. And the way that you're going to get that support is to be around other people and to be around professionals who have seen this kind of thing before, who have a lot of experience coaching people through, and who can help you both with the actual process of revising and with the mindset pieces. So I really hope that you will join us in that program. I would really love to see you there. And also, please let me know if there are things that you'd like to cover on this channel. You can always just leave a comment or send us an email at books@pageandpodium.com. And we really love to hear from all of y'all about the types of topics that are helpful for you. Okay, but for now, please make sure that you like, rate, review, and subscribe, because I know that you will not want to miss the second part in our 4-part revision series when we will be talking about what makes a memoir good. I know you don't want to just revise into the dark. We all want to revise toward some clear goal. And that's why we're creating this second video in the series to really look at what are the actual building blocks of that goal I know you have of having your memoir be as good and strong and saleable and marketable as possible. Okay, I look forward to seeing you next week for that video, and otherwise, stay tuned and happy revising.
You know what they say, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. And this is exactly what holds so many people back on their memoir projects. That is exactly why we created the Memoir Method Checklist, a full, complete list of every single step you need to take to get that memoir written, published, and marketed successfully. You can download it now at pageandpodium.com/checklist.